This is a quality orbiter, so I'm gonna leave. Have a great time. I actually want to listen to this.
Loser.
Oh, damn.
What's up? Oh, no pressure. Now you got a lot of pressure on you. Oof. You talked to P-Boy, the P-Man, the big Patrick Doyle recently, didn't you?
I did, yeah. It was a little bit ago.
How'd
I
that
think
go?
the actual conversation was a while ago, but it went pretty well. Patrick is a really well informed person. Although
Is he, though?
when
Yeah, take him out. What? Although what?
I would say he's really well informed, but he's more finance than economics, and because of that, he
Is a dumb
you know
fuck.
well when talking about policy, he didn't engage a lot. It was more so like I prefer the least government solution possible, and it's like, well, that's
Yikes,
kind of true for
bro.
everyone,
Did you tell him he's basically a Nazi, or?
Well, that if the conversation was 2 hours long, it probably would have gotten at that point. But no, it had to end after an hour. He's a busy man, full-time professor and everything. So, but that was a pretty good conversation. But that was a bit ago. Lately, it's been talking to anarchists and
Yikes, fam.
going over
on that Twitch politics.
going over
grind.
news articles. I guess so. Yeah. I'm not sure what the. I don't even know what's really happening in broader Twitch politics right now. I don't see many debates or anything like that.
Well,
nowadays,
basically all you have left are people that are literally, how they call my friends or whatever, like orbiters.
yeah,
You have
yeah.
you have actual orbiters for Twitch politics, and it's all people that are Hasan orbiters, like actually orbiting. Like they like there's a bunch of people that are like Hasan fans that talk about like Hasan related stuff, but they don't ever interact with him ever. It's kind of sad. So Denims and I think Mike from PA, or Denims and Central Committee.
Did they literally never go on Hasan's stream? Like they're not.
No.
Like
I don't know if Denims
Hasan
ever
wouldn't-
has. I think Central Committee went on one time like a year ago.
Do you think if Hasan was asked like about Mike from PA or Denims, do you think he would remember who they are?
He might know of them, but
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, that kind of I've heard of people doing that, but I don't. I mean, like I have just a regular schedule, so it's like, oh yeah, Vosh and Destiny stream from fucking, I don't know, from 4 to 8, so I've got to be sure to stream at 8 o'clock every day.
Ooh.
I don't know how. It seems hard to time that kind of thing with just a regular schedule.
Sure. Hold on. We got some smoke in the air. Somebody's
no.
asking why is RagePope dodging a student loan debate.
That was from
Is this
so long
true?
ago. No, well, not really. I mean, I asked RagePope if he wanted to talk about it, but he didn't really seem very interested in it.
Ooh.
You know.
Why not?
So, it's probably because I would dominate him so hard in the debate. That's probably what it was.
Damn.
It just would have been a really one-sided conversation.
Okay. Okay.
Now we had a text back and forth on it on Discord, and it seemed like the positions kind of it seemed like his position was just that it was a bad use of money, and my position was that it probably does more good than it does harm, and so it's probably fine. But I mean, at this point, it's kind of moot because it really doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So
Really? I thought it was a TRO. Is it like dead in the water, or?
I mean, I just with the court the way it is, especially the Supreme Court is the next step on this one. I just don't have a lot of faith in the current court to like do a thing.
Hasn't the Supreme Court for a while been all about like fucking sucking off executive powers and shit though, and giving the executive like more and more? Like, would they stop here?
I mean, it's an interesting argument, right? Because I mean, I'd be interested to hear Pisco's perspective, but it does seem somewhat plain that the president does have the power to do this. I didn't actually know this, but I think it was Obama that actually took, the way we used to do student loans was that they were kind of packaged almost like mortgages and sold on a secondary market. But Obama was the one that took essentially almost the whole student loan market and put it under direct lending from the federal government. And so because now student loans are basically entirely just a federal, run by the executive program, it seems like almost any legal justification would lead you to the president does have the power to forgive loans. I mean, Biden has been forgiving student loans his whole presidency, like people that have been scammed by these for-profit colleges or people who like I think he's been forgiving a lot of people with disabilities that have student loans, like all their debt, stuff like that. So, I mean, obviously the president can forgive loans. I think that the question is just, can you massively forgive loans in the way that?
Well, actually, let me ask about that. When you talk about those for-profit colleges, are loans being forgiven there, or are they just like returning money from like those schools and like making the schools repay it, and it happens to be the money was taken out of loans? Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, it could be both. Like I haven't seen.
Well, because those are materially different. Like let's say that let's say that Biden says that AT&T fucked you over real hard, Steven. I'm gonna forgive your. I'm gonna make AT&T pay you back. And let's say that I paid my AT&T bill with a credit card. He's not like forgiving my credit card debt, right? He's just getting AT&T to pay me back. I just happen to pay with a credit card. So if you're talking about like a private school scam that's being like reimbursed, that's not really like forgiving student loans, right? It's like a specific.
Well, but that would also be a court order, right? So I think the thing with all these student loan forgivenesses that Joe Biden has done is that it is federal student loans that like balances that he's forgiving. But what it is that if you go to a private college in America, depending on its accreditation, I'm pretty sure essentially any private college, you're able to use federal student loans to pay to go to private colleges. And I'm pretty sure the situation with Biden forgiving those people that got scammed by these for-profit colleges is for-profit colleges that students were eligible to take out federal loans to pay for. And so I'm not sure, when I say I don't know what happens on the back end, like it might be the case that the courts are saying you owe fines, you're going to be prosecuted in this way, where you're paying the federal government, but the actual balances of the loans, those are still just like just regular federal student loans, like pretty much everyone else takes. So, but it's also been a lot smaller scale than the whole mass forgiveness thing. I mean, we're talking, I don't know, like a few $1 billion worth of loan forgiveness, but the Biden plan was for a few $100 billion, for everyone basically. But yeah, but I had a question, Destiny. I wanted you to walk me through one of your positions because I don't understand.
I got you, dude. Veganism, abortion. Yeah, what is it, man?
Oh, it's one of your favorites, Destiny. All right. So self-ID.
Oh, right. God. So, how cringe.
Look, Destiny.
God.
I've been thinking about this for a couple days now.
Okay. As long as you don't use names as an example, I won't fucking crucify you. So, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'd use names as an example. I think from my perspective, it's more so I just don't understand what the problem is with people just without dysphoria saying I identify with the gender that I wasn't assigned
because you can't do that ever. That's just not a thing you can do. Like, can you think of a single other thing that I would ever do that with?
I heard somebody on Reddit say like if I identified as like punk, it's like that's a social category of people, and it doesn't really. I don't think that there's a lot of scrutiny with regards to someone identifying as like
if you identify
punk
as
or
punk,
geek.
Are you punk or geek because you identify as it? Like it's not, right? That's not how that works.
There's a collection of things that you could have a standard by which you accept or deny people the label of punk, but when it comes to kind of regulating how people identify and organizing how people identify, I don't think there's a big problem with like a middle-aged dad in a suburban neighborhood with a crew cut haircut saying he's punk. It's like, okay, I mean,
well, but there's got to be something. Like, does he listen to punk music? What if he doesn't even listen to punk music? Could he identify as punk?
Well, honestly, punk is not a community I'm very familiar with.
Well, okay, but then let's think of something we're familiar with, right? Anything, because you can't
like nerd.
Yeah, you can't just be a thing
culture.
because you identify as it. You could identify as it as a way of like showing like or speaking about some qualities or characteristics that you have, but you don't become the thing because you identify as a thing ever. We would never.
I see what you're saying. Well, so
yeah.
So you're saying woman is a social category, but it's a social category that does have meaning to it.
Yeah, maps onto something.
Well, what does it map onto? You're saying it maps onto like social expectation, I guess.
Well, generally, like our gender and sex are pretty closely intertwined generally, and these usually map onto, or ideally, they map onto some kind of like internal state of mind, like internal brain state.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, that's necessarily true, right? Because if you're identifying as it, if there's something in your brain that's telling you, you should identify as this thing.
No,
I think
woman does not mean you identify as a woman. Man
No,
does
no,
not
it doesn't.
mean
I'm
person who
saying-
identifies as a man. There's something internal there. So you can, when you identify as something, I think there's a lot of like complicated word games that are happening. When you identify as something, it's not so much that
Yeah.
you're identifying as something. You're identifying a thing. Like when someone says like I am a woman, you're like identifying, or you're declaring a part of yourself. You're noticing something. Or you're revealing something. You're not becoming something. People use identify as
Sure.
another way to say become, instead of like I'm pointing something out. I'm observing. I don't like when I say I identify as a gamer. It's more like I observe myself as a gamer, not I become a gamer
Sure.
because I identify, which is how people use the identify thing, which I think is weird.
Well, right, but so it sounds like it's almost two conversations, right? So with that framework, I think you could say that someone could be trans without dysphoria, right? Because
Well, that's
they
a
do,
fundamentally whether or not you're trans, whether or not you have to have dysphoria or not to be trans, is a fundamentally different type of conversation than the self ID thing, I think. But we can have that conversation too if you want. But I want to be clear that those are
well, yeah,
different
I mean that's
conversations.
kind of what I'm more getting at is that I've always heard of those two conversations. Basically, it's almost the same conversation, but it sounds like you're saying there is a difference between self ID people and people who think you don't have to have dysphoria to be in order to be considered trans, because that's kind of more what I was thinking of, because to me it doesn't make sense how it would be like a necessary requirement to have dysphoria to be considered trans, because ultimately if we even think of someone who like attempts to pass as a woman but who doesn't have severe gender dysphoria, I'm not sure why we would not call that person a woman, in respect to identification. But it sounds like
let's say right
Yeah, go
now
on.
I ID as a woman. Do you believe me?
Yeah. So that seems like that's more what you're talking about when you say self-ID is dumb, is like people who it wouldn't be obvious in any context that the ID would make sense. Like you'd never assume, like if I look at you, I wouldn't
Well, no, we're not
assume
talking.
that.
Well, but now you're getting to my argument. You would never assume that. Why? Because it sounds like you're saying there's an underlying fact of the matter that contradicts my identification there. Contradicts.
Yeah. Like I think religions are probably a good analogous example of this, where like if somebody, like for instance, if somebody were to say I'm Muslim, but I believe Jesus Christ is my Savior and Lord, it's like, okay, well that doesn't. You can't really be both of those things.
Yeah.
Right? Now, woman or man is more complicated, because there's a lot of women who don't fit like the standard sort of feminization model or feminized model that we might think of. Like there's like tomboys and
Sure.
butch women who it's hard to. I think it would be difficult to argue that they're not women, but at the same time, if the same sort of physical and secondary characteristics were a person with a penis, we would say, well, that person can't be a woman, right?
Yeah, but
Because
keep in mind, traditionally,
they're
we
a
don't
masculine man.
But we don't have trouble. Like women and men, social roles get a little bit more complicated. But I mean, like prior to like all the self ID nonsense, like we've never had trouble identifying a tomboy as a woman, right? A tomboy is clearly a woman, and a feminine man is clearly a man. We don't normally have trouble identifying those as such. We don't even like. There's not even a little bit of confusion. Like, well, is a tomboy really a woman because they exhibit some gender roles that are so, like no one even questioned that before, right?
Right, but it sounds like really you'd almost have to go back to the sex argument, right? Of like the reason a butch woman is a woman but not a masculine man is because the man has a penis, right? Because of the chromosomal makeup of the person.
I mean, like primary, secondary sexual characteristics, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean and that's an argument that I guess to me I find it unsatisfying, just because that if we're reducing it back down to the sort of chromosomal makeup of a person, well, I wouldn't accept that as an argument for why trans women aren't women. Oh, well, they're not really a woman because they.
We got to be. I think we have to be really, really, really careful that we don't fall into a trap of letting our ethics inform or define our metaphysics. We can't let our desired ethical outcome influence how we observe and describe the world. I think we get into a really scary place there. So. Yeah, we don't ever want to be in a place where we're like, yeah, trans people definitely aren't real, and I feel that way 1,000,000%. But like, oof, that's a really mean thing to say, so I'm gonna go ahead and pretend they are real, right? That's essentially what we're saying there when we're like, well, it'd be disrespectful to not acknowledge this. So if we are going to acknowledge trans people as real, it has to come from a metaphysical subcategory, ontological understanding of like what is woman, what is man, and then we got kind of work from there. Otherwise, I think we're engaging in scary self-delusion. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess the issue really just comes down to, like, excluding someone from the category of woman seems a difficult thing to do,
Does it?
right? I mean, like I said, I think the example of like a butch woman versus just a masculine man, it's like, well, we're excluding one because they have a penis and one because they don't have a penis. But
yeah, but does anybody really have a problem with that?
I think the issue is the consistency of the standard, right? Because again, we wouldn't look at like a passing trans woman and say, or at least in a progressive space, we wouldn't look at a passing trans woman and say, you're not a woman because you have a penis, right? It's like, okay, well, why does the penis matter in one circumstance but not another? Now, I think the answer is simple enough just to say that, well, a masculine man versus a trans woman attempting to pass, a trans woman attempting to pass is like doing a lot more work to fit the defined sort of stereotype of woman in this circumstance, whereas like you could argue with a butch woman, it's the opposite, that they're almost doing more work to come across as more masculine, but just by way of being born with a vagina, we're including them in the category of woman. It's, you know, it just seems very inconsistent how we would identify those two people and categorize them from a gatekeeping perspective on what is a woman.
But it's only if we, let's say we throw all the trans stuff away, right? If we throw all of that away, then it works pretty cleanly, right? We don't really have much of a problem, right?
Like if no one identifies.
Yeah, let's pretend that trans people don't exist. Do we have a problem with like tomboys or effeminate men?
A problem with them? Well, in my world, no, because I lean a little bit more.
When I say problem, I mean like, do we have a problem like identifying? Like, oh no, like that's a tomboy. Like, I'm not sure what a woman is. Like, does that happen?
So it's almost like you're asking, would someone, if a tomboy came to me and said, I'm a woman, but I'm a tomboy, do you think that would start an argument? And I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I don't think we have any problem. I think we have tons of clarity there on, is it a man or a woman, right? We've never had that issue before, right? So let's say that we do have an understanding of like what a woman is. Even with tomboys, we have an understanding with what men are. Even with the most effeminate men, it seems like we have some understanding of that. So then if we introduce trans people into the mix, and we want to say that like trans people are men or women, it seems like we have to grapple with that honestly, rather than being like, oh well, it's confusing because of like tomboys and effeminate men. Because before trans people are introduced, tomboys and effeminate men don't challenge our prior sex constructions at all, or even our gender constructions. We don't worry about that at all, right? We might say somebody is manly or feminine. A tomboy is manly, but never a man. And an effeminate man is never a woman, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I see what you're saying. I think I do think that those types of people historically have gotten criticisms for challenging gender norms, although not because of, like, I don't think the conversation in that regard would be like, you're not a real woman because you wear baseball caps, you know, and you fucking are muscular or something like that. I think it's more almost just a general offense in that regard, like, oh, you know, this is just not what a woman's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And
or
so
even when they
you're
say
right
when they say you're not a real woman, they don't actually mean you are a man. They just mean you're not acting feminine, right? Sometimes we use women or man as a shortcut for masculine or feminine. We don't actually mean to say man or woman at all, right?
Right. And so in this regard, you're right that the fact that, you know, trans people existing and, you know, being, again, in a progressive space being considered pretty legitimate does, I think, complicate that conversation.
I agree.
I guess I revert back to the, you know, I think of someone that I met when I was much younger. It was at a political convention, and it was a trans woman who, like, by all physical accounts, seemed fairly masculine, right? This was a trans woman who had a beard and, like, you know, long hair, sure, wore a dress, right, but very muscular, like, had a beard and had kind of a mix of what would be considered, you know, masculine and feminine traits. You know, if you were to look at that person, would you say, well, that person isn't doing enough work to earn the label of woman? Or would you just say, well, you know, they identify as a woman, so I'll respect that, you know, whatever she, her.
Yeah, there's a lot of differences at play here. When we say, like, would we respect that? Like, I probably would always respect it just because it's like a general nicety. But that doesn't get to the fundamental question of, like, is that a man or is that a woman, right?
Right, so you would respect it, but in the back of your head, you would say, like, they're not, you know, it's not really like a person who's a woman, you know. I'd consider that a man.
Probably. I think most people would. Even progressives, I think.
Most
they
people
would.
probably would. Yeah, I think most. Well, you're right on most people. Sure. I mean, I think that. Yeah, I guess from my point of view, it's hard to shake me off of it, just because when I think of like, woman as a social category, and then, oh, 1 second.
Uh-oh.
My oh, there we go. For some reason, my headphones disconnected and reconnected. Yeah, I just have a hard time thinking in a circumstance like that. It's like, oh hey, I'm a woman, and then somebody, they say that, and the person that I just described says that to me, and I'm just like, okay, I don't, it's not a big deal to me, and I wouldn't. It just from like a technical perspective, we really get down to the nitty gritty. I have a hard time because of any one characteristic excluding someone from the category of woman. There's probably someone we can come up with in our heads where it would be so weird for them to identify as a woman.
Sure,
but
I think that there is it's not about like what's weird or not. In my mind, and this has been pretty compelling to me, and maybe it'll change in the future, and I'll change my mind. But if this changed, I would probably just not believe in trans people. It seems to me that there is an underlying fact of the matter about a gender existing in a person's mind. It seems to be a thing that happens, that our brains in some ways are gendered. That's the only way so far. That's the only satisfactory explanation I have of trans people, is that it seems like our brains are somewhat gendered. So if it is the case that our brains are gendered, when somebody says I'm trans, what they're saying is for whatever reason, for whatever combination of biological and environmental factors, their brain seems to be sexed differently than their body. There's a mismatch there. And then to bring the body in line with the brain, we do hormones or surgery or whatever. That seems to be the case. But there's an underlying fact of the matter about the sex of the brain there, if you truly do believe in trans people. If you believe in self-ID, you don't believe in trans people. You believe in gender as an aesthetic. Self-ID necessarily, I think, precludes the existence of trans people, because if anybody can ID as anything, then nobody is truly anything. So there's no reason to ever have dysphoria. And if people kill themselves, they're fucking stupid, because they should just ID as something else, right? Like if you were a trans woman and you were miserable because you didn't pass and you felt like you looked like shit, why don't you just ID as a man then? And it seems like the only real, why wouldn't, so let's say you've got a suicidal trans woman and she's like, fuck, like I'm 6'4", okay, I'm Shaquille O'Neal, and I want to be Shaquille O'Neal, and I'm fucked now. I went through male puberty, I'm huge. Why wouldn't you say to that person, okay, well here, I can fix your whole problem, like why don't you just ID as a man, boom.
I think that there's a difference. I think someone who believes in self-ID could also believe in gender dysphoria, right? And
well, but I'm asking, why would you have gender dysphoria? Why not just ID as the other thing, so then now you don't have any dysphoria?
Well, because you want to not do that. You very much want to like be accepted in ID as the other thing.
But where does that desire come from?
Well, it comes from your brain, obviously. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I'm not sure of the. I don't know why it would be incompatible, the idea that you could just ID as a woman if you want, based on your preference.
Well, but careful. Those are two different things. IDing is what you want based on a preference, and if that preference is strong enough, right? Like, I choose to eat steak over garbage because I have a preference for steak, but am I really choosing to eat steak over garbage? Could I really choose to eat garbage? Doesn't seem like it. It seems like there's an underlying fact of the matter that's guiding that preference there. I don't ID as somebody that eats food that can ultimately be broken down into glucose. I observe myself as somebody that does that. I don't ID as it. That is the fact of the matter. I am something that consumes things for energy, right? I can't just eat things because they fit in my mouth, right? And it seems to be the same thing with trans too. You don't ID as a woman just because, that would be fun. It seems like there's an underlying driving fact of the matter there that pushes you in that direction, is my feeling.
Well, what is the fact of the matter rooted in?
Some brain chemistry that is sexing the brain as male or female, that makes somebody suicidal if they have an incongruency there in the way that they are, in the way that their body represents itself.
Yeah. So I would say that it just, I guess I don't know like the long-term history of being trans. Like, before, back in caveman days, I don't know if. I don't know if there were people who had gender dysphoria back when we didn't have like a pretty well-defined, notion of gender, right? So that'd be an interesting. I think that could answer that question, But I would just say that when it comes to self-ID in a world where there are dysphoric people who really suffer because of their sort of self ID, then I think it would just be easy enough to say that the dysphoric people obviously have a deeper sort of chemical reason why they're compelled almost to ID as a gender different from the one assigned to them at birth, and then someone who doesn't have dysphoria, who's just identifying as a woman because they just have some sort of soft preference to do so. They were assigned male at birth, and they grew up, and turns out they like dresses and makeup, and they just decide to identify as a woman, and that's how they go. To me, it seems reasonable enough to say that the person who's self-identifying is perfectly legitimate and reasonable, and if you want to identify that way, that's fine. And then the person who has dysphoria, who's identifying, that comes with a new set of problems in terms of
but like,
why
would we allow somebody to
handle that,
identify
but-
something with no underlying fact of the matter? Like, and then this is where I would challenge you. Like, is there any other thing we would let people do that? Like, let's say I told you, like,
No,
I
I
was
see
a
what you're
Dallas
saying.
Cowboys
Yeah.
fan, and I've never been to a game, and I think the Dallas Cowboys are like a Canadian hockey team. Am I allowed to ID as a Dallas Cowboys fan, or would you say, bro, you don't know what the fuck that is? You can't just ID as that. You're not that.
No, that's what I'm saying, is that the category of woman, to me, it seems like it would be very hard to exclude someone of. I said earlier that it's conceivable to come up with a person like.
Well, but it seems like we could do this.
I
We
think,
could do this right now. I ID as a woman. Do you believe me?
No, that's what I was going to bring up an example. Like, I remember in one of Lauren Southern's, I think in one of her like on the street things she did back like probably like 5 or 6 years ago. She made a joke about how in Canada, I guess you can apply and change.
Yeah, I think
your
she changed her
on
gender
your-
in like Ontario or some shit. She might be a man over there.
Right. So like on her, I don't know, like on her utility bill or something, or on her ID card, it says man instead of woman. And in that regard, I'd say I wouldn't consider that very legitimate, just because it's obviously not a genuinely held belief.
Whoa,
right?
whoa, whoa, look, okay, hold on. You're using, I think we agree. I think you don't want to agree with me because it's not very progressive. It doesn't sound that way. But I think we do agree because a lot of the language that you're using, it is indicating to me that we are thinking the same thing. Like when you say that it's not a genuinely held belief, it seems like you do believe there's an underlying fact of the matter there, but whether or not they're actually
that's
trans.
That's what that's what I said. Remember, that's what I said before.
Okay, then,
which is
then that means
we
you can't believe in self-ID then. Nobody can just ID as a thing. They can only observe themselves as being a thing. You're never the thing because you say you are. You just say what you are to identify the thing you are to other people. But you don't become that thing or you're not that thing just by virtue of saying you're that thing.
Yeah, sure. So that's what I was saying before, was that insofar as we have sort of requirements for social categories, then of course it would seem illogical to just simply identify as one or another, right? But that's kind of where I'm left with this question of like, how do we really exclude people from something like the category of woman, right?
Well, we just decide what the category is. Yeah. Right? You just have
but
that. Now we
I don't
got
know.
our legendary Matt Walsh question of like, what is a woman, right?
Well, right, but I mean, if someone asked me that question, I would just say a gender category, and if they really came down to it, I would say, it's a gender category that's typically associated with female secondary sex characteristics. But the word typically does a lot of heavy lifting there, because again, the example of a butch woman versus just a masculine man, if both of those people identified as women, it's like, okay, well, I guess it is literally just the masculine man not having a vagina that would give me pause, but...
Well, I think we got to be really careful not to like continuum fallacy ourselves here. Like just because there can be some blurriness around the edges doesn't mean that the categories are meaningless, right? If I I don't think I could ever give you, or you could never give me like a rigid difference between like a crossover and an SUV, right? I'm pretty sure we could find some cars that like are blurry around the edges, but that doesn't mean that SUVs and crossovers don't exist, right?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think that what I can come to at this point in the conversation is that self-ID seems like on the margin it could be very confusing and irrational, like kind of like an example of Lauren Southern, or like if someone basically just outside of literally any work or attempt to fit that social category identified as the opposite gender to what their sex is, like that would be very confusing. But I would say that for 99.9% of people who identify as like a woman who were assigned male at birth, I don't really think this problem really exists. At least
Well,
maybe there's people on Twitter. But
I think the problem
really...
right now is that like when we ask like what is a trans person, we have a really difficult time now figuring that out. And I think that the online trans community underlines the validity of trans identity with self-ID. Because if you're telling me that you can be a thing by identifying as a thing, what you're really telling me is that that thing is not real. Because if I can be a thing because I say I'm a thing, then anybody can be that thing. But that's not true. Trans people don't kill themselves because they could be anything. They kill themselves because they truly do feel like they are something that they're not, or something's not being expressed correctly.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I have the genuinely held belief thing is one of the more important questions, because that's how we the religion example is a decently analogous one. It's also how we regulate religious protections, right? It's that your religious beliefs have to be genuinely held, right? You can't just walk in and say that you're
like all the people saying that like I don't want to get the vaccine, I've got a religious exemption, and you like show up in like a fucking
that's a good example from like a progressive perspective. Like you have to legitimately demonstrably have that belief and couch that belief in somewhat of a long-term understanding of your religion to actually qualify for certain protections and understandings, right? And that's where, I think that, the courts had some interesting questions in that regard. How do you, denying gay people service at, restaurants and stuff like that? How does that fit into our understanding of religious freedom and rights and stuff? But, I think similarly, when it comes to regulating, issues surrounding healthcare access and bullying and workplace conduct, right? I think that probably the best rule is just to respect self-ID.
I think once healthcare is involved, I feel like I disagree. I think that once healthcare gets involved, the gatekeeping becomes paramount. It's like the most important thing is to gatekeep at that point. For instance, should I be able to? We'll do an easy one. Should I be able to self-ID as a cancer patient and get chemotherapy, or self-ID as someone in chronic pain and get Vicodin prescribed to me? Probably not, right? Obviously.
Well, yeah. When I think of healthcare access, I think more for minors. In terms of gatekeeping,
well, even for minors, it's the same thing. Should a minor be able to self-ID as having chronic pain and get a Vicodin prescription?
That's what I'm saying. I think for minors it's different because we treat kids differently. I don't know if the issue is the self-ID. It's more so the fact that they're kids. Now, for certain drugs and treatments, I agree that self-IDing as like having the disease is one thing, but being a woman isn't a disease, right? And so
I was using that's the easy example to set up. But now for one that's a little bit harder, we're walking our way there, right? Should a kid be able to self-ID as having ADHD or self-ID as having depression?
No. That's what I'm saying is that the kids, I think there's a very wide latitude of gatekeeping that makes sense because they're kids, right? You probably imagine they don't really know.
I don't think it has anything to do with kids. Even for adults, should an adult be able to self-ID as having ADHD or self-ID as having depression?
Right. The adult is the harder question, right? Because if somebody comes into an office and says, I have ADHD, can I please have an Adderall prescription? That's still gatekept behind a professional. And I don't know if that's wrong. Now, I think that with regards to someone who wants to get like hormones or something like that, I mean, I really don't know how gatekept that should be. If an adult walks into an office and says, I want to be put on estrogen, I mean, I guess.
Well, if we're talking,
if you really want to.
Well, there's two ways it can go. If it's medical, then yeah, it should be gatekept. We need to make sure you're actually trans. Now, if it's just like elective or cosmetic, then fine. If you want to, be the best femboy you can be on Twitter, then fucking have all the estrogen you want.
Yeah.
But like, if we're talking about like an actual healthcare thing, then it seems like it's probably pretty important to gatekeep because we need to determine if this is actual medical care you need and it's not just an abuse or confusion or something else, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think the issue is that with transness, it's with dysphoria, I should say, it's a mental illness, right?
But that's why I used earlier the examples of ADHD and depression. Those are mental illnesses.
ADHD,
as well,
yeah. Oh, sorry, gotta turn my signal off here. 1 second. Oh, okay.
But even for those, and a lot of, I say a lot of trans people, but it's not really, it's just these crazy ones like fucking Doe and Demon Mama. They will sometimes incorrectly state, oh, well, you do self-ID with like depression and stuff because you go to a therapist and you tell them you have depression. That's not true. What you do is you self-report, but you don't report a disease, you report symptoms, and then it's up to the professional to decide if the symptoms fit an illness.
Right? I mean, the doctor's not, if that were true, I mean, the doctor would be like obligated to give you a prescription, which they're certainly under no obligation to do that. With hormones, I really don't. I assume it works the same way. I don't know. I really don't know if you can just walk into a hormone clinic and get hormones. I assume that you still have to.
Well, that's what the huge fucking online debates and everything have been, right? Is should you be able to walk in and get hormones, or should there be a more rigorous process by which we determine if somebody is actually trans? Like that question of can you be actually trans or not? Some people, the self-ID crowd, would consider that question to be transphobic. Yeah. And that's where it all comes back to. So it's like, so are trans people real? Self-ID people would say, well, trans is just as real as you want it to be. Anybody that says they're trans is trans. I personally don't like that view for a variety of reasons. And I think that, no, there is an underlying fact of the matter. Trans people are real. They're not just socially constructed on Twitter. There is an underlying fact of the matter there. And then that comes down to, then you debate that out,
Yeah, I think the issue with the treatment is, I guess really when I think of like how hard we gatekeep certain treatments and medical solutions, it's really just how serious we tend to assume that those treatments are. Like, for instance, like if you're a man and you want a hair transplant, there's pretty much nothing stopping you from getting one. Yeah. I mean, you just need the money and you can get one.
It's propensity to abuse, right? Like if I go and I want to get like antibiotics, well, maybe that's not the greatest example, but like it's going to be really...
Well, you can abuse plastic surgery, right? But there's really no gate. I mean, if you have the money, you can get pretty much as much plastic surgery as you want, right? Even though that's surgery. Right?
Can you get, well, I'm sorry, you would abuse in an illegal way, I should say, I guess. Well, would that be it? Because like, you couldn't do it with drugs because they don't want you manufacturing drugs or selling drugs or something. Those are like controlled, like scheduled drugs you can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't just get propofol, right? But I mean, that's how you get put to sleep. And like, as far as I understand, most medical situations, you're taking propofol. But if in terms of plastic surgery, I think the reason that it's not really gatekept in terms of actual medically you're unable to get it because of medical reasons, is because we just don't really feel like, number one, it's that serious, and number two, I guess it's because it's cosmetic surgery. It's like, well, fuck, if the person really wants it, even if it looks bad, even if it's clearly an addiction, it's like, well, it is just cosmetic surgery, right? It's like,
it might also be because they pay for it too, right? Like, I don't think insurance is covering a fucking boob job unless you're getting like a cancer.
Well, yeah, but that, right? In terms of the moral sort of argument,
well, the moral argument is pretty important, right? Like, if insurance was starting to cover like cosmetic surgeries, I think people would be upset about that, right?
No, that's what I'm saying is that in terms of like applying that logic to the trans issue, I think that the insurance question isn't as important from a first standpoint, but when it comes to answering the question, I think it's really just the answer is how serious do we think giving someone hormones is, and how how valuable is it to really gatekeep it behind a medical professional? I really don't know the answer to that. Like, I don't know if reversing hormone treatment is really hard, or
I think for adults it shouldn't matter. If you want to go walk into any place and get hormones, then fuck it. Men already do it with TRT. Like if you want to do it, then fuck it. I think you should be able to. But for children, that's where the hot debates come from, because you're doing changes to your body that can have severe emotional, psychological, and then physical impacts in the future, right?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think that I'm trying to think of what like an extreme self-ID person would say about the children issue. I mean,
children should be able to ID as anything and get whatever hormones they want. That's what they say.
Yeah, but then it's like, well, can a child ID as like, I want to have sex with this adult, and should we respect
Wait,
that?
what?
Like, well, I'm saying, like, if we just respect a child's preference, like, is that really a way to regulate, whether or not we give the child the thing they want? And I
don't, and I would say
pure like self-ID doesn't. I don't see why we would like just respect the way a child identifies in terms of whether or not we get them, the treatment that they're desiring, right? And with someone who's like extreme self-ID, it seems like that's a very hard position to defend when it comes to children.
Well, you should go argue with Demon Mom about it.
Honestly, I don't know what does Demon Mama still stream regularly? Like, I haven't seen much from Demon Mama in quite a while, but
I have no idea. Well, maybe these people are going, thank God, fuck them.
I don't know, but no, like, with self ID and children, I think it should be easy enough for someone who believes in self ID just to say, like, well, obviously children are different because they're children, and fucking, we don't trust children to really make decisions for themselves.
Well, but we have to trust them to some extent, right?
Well, that's yeah, to some degree that's true.
Like, we
Like,
trust them for
if
mental stuff, right? Like, I have to trust Nathan is accurately reporting his mental state for him to get like ADHD shit, and he's not just like fucking faking it the whole time to get like some amphetamine. I would hope he wouldn't do that at age.
well, but he's
7 or whatever.
also, if I'm not mistaken, like if you want to give a child like a ADHD or like a depression medication, the doctor is still going to independently evaluate the child. It's not just like, oh, your kid's ADHD.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, well here.
But it's still ultimately like relying on like self-reporting, not self-IDing, but self-reporting, right? Yeah.
That's part of the equation, but it's not the whole equation, right? I think that for someone like you're describing, it seems like, well, the whole equation is just, does the child identify as trans? And I think that that's where I think most, even very pro-trans people, I think would mostly say that if a child identifies as being trans and has severe dysphoria and wants treatment for that dysphoria, then you'd still need to get a doctor.
Well, that's
gatekeeping.
That's not true. Most people don't agree with that, right? A lot of people would say what the position that you just gave. It's one that I agree with, but a lot of people would call that transmedicalism, which is considered a transphobic position.
I guess so. Yeah, I just don't. I don't. Well, I disagree. It may be in terms of what we mean by most people. I think most regular, like, touching grass people would agree that if a child is trans, that they should be able to get the treatment that they want, assuming it's under a pretty rigorous standard defined by medical institutions and stuff like that. I think that the Twitter take potentially of like children should just be able to get literally whatever treatment they want whenever they want is that's a pretty radical position. I don't think most people would agree with that.
I agree. But the problem is these conversations are led by the fucking extremists, right? That's always the frustrating part. You saw that fucking YouGov poll where it was like 25% of, or people think that like 25% of Americans are trans.
People think 25% of Americans are trans.
Yeah, they was asked like what percentage of Americans are trans, and a lot of people are pulling back on the average of like 25%. It's unbelievable, right?
Well, I honestly don't know what that looks like for Gen Z. But I
promise
recall
it's not over 25%. Sorry, go ahead.
I can't imagine it's 25% that are trans, but I did see a poll, and it was something like, I think it was like a third of Gen Zers identify as basically not homosexual. Like they're bi or pan or
not
they're
heterosexual,
gay,
right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so it seems like society has shifted to some degree where.
That's
people
true,
just
but
a
I'd
lot
be
more
really careful.
open.
I think sexuality, is a lot different than sexual identity. I think those two things are very, very, very different. But
No, that's true, but I wouldn't be surprised though if I wouldn't be surprised if like Gen Z is like, 25% seems pretty high just from a
for sure.
conjecture, but like I wouldn't be surprised if like we tracked like the percentage of each generation identifying as trans. I wouldn't be surprised if you see a noticeable bump with Gen Zers.
Yeah, no, we do, because I've seen some polls that it's like is it as much as like 6 or 7%, I think, are trans, but the problem is when you open those numbers up, it's like 85 or 95% of people are non-binary, right? And then this is where we circle back to that self-ID argument, is that there are way more trans Gen Zers, but it's just a bunch of like women that are identifying as non-binary using neopronouns. And that and so now like our concept, like, well, what the fuck does it even mean to be trans, or what the fuck is any of this, is getting like blown the fuck apart because we've seen an explosive growth in the trans community, but the quote unquote trans community is all assigned female at birth, AFABs with dyed hair, piercings, and neopronouns.
Yeah, I guess it would depend on what you define as trans. Yeah, because if you're including non-binary in your definition of trans in that question, then because that seems to have gotten significantly more popular is identifying as non-binary.
Yeah. And I think that's problematic for a lot of reasons too, because like you've got people like everybody, including Jordan Peterson's the big guy here, who's pushing this idea of social contagion. And it's like, I don't think people are getting tricked. I'm sure it happens on a very, very, very small scale. There's going to be some confused people that get swept into dumb shit. But by and large, people are getting tricked into being trans women or trans men. But tricked into being like non-binary people that never get medication, yeah, probably. But I mean, like, who the fuck cares? Like, if you identify as a non-binary person, like, nobody cares about you. You fucking, that's stolen valor, or even call yourself trans at that point. But if you're skewing the numbers now, and you're making it seem like, holy shit, like 20% of women are now non-binary or trans on college campuses. Well, that social contagion looks really scary until you break open the numbers and you realize, oh, it's not a bunch of people, chopping their dicks off like Matt Walsh says. It's just a bunch of women, using other pronouns.
Well, I guess I do wonder to what degree. I wonder to what degree that argument applies to not necessarily being trans, but identifying as LGBTQ in some way, because like I wouldn't be surprised if it was the case that if society becomes generally more accepting of like you're a dude and you like other dudes, either all the time or some of the time, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot more people were like, you know what, I do kind of like dudes, it'd be interesting to see if the trend of like a significantly higher portion of Gen Zers like identifying as LGBTQ in some way, it'd be interesting to see if that trend just kind of continues as sexual kind of boundaries break down.
Yeah, but you got to be careful there, because now at that point you're proving the scared conservative argument of like, fuck, we actually are creating more gay people and trans people. That social contagion thing is real.
Well, I think that calling it social contagion is obviously it's obviously a very negative framing, right? Because you're essentially saying like, and it's bad that more people are gay, I guess. But from my perspective, it's like, I mean, it's fine. If people want to do that, it's not a big deal. So, I think there's a progressive. I mean, I think you can recognize that potentially as a social trend that's real, but also think it's not a big deal. Because I mean, again, in like a very sexually open society, it wouldn't surprise me if like the more sexually open a society is, the more like LGBTQ people there are, just because people feel comfortable kind of exploring that and
Sure, I think like the more LGBTQ, yeah, like more people be bi. But if you're starting to like create a whole bunch more gay people, I think that's like cause for concern. I think there'd be something to probably look at.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I guess that's
that
true.
Bi part is like, it's like the bi people are like the non-binary of like the LGBT kind of world, where it's like, oh, cool, you're bi, so you can kind of like fit in like anywhere or whatever. But it's a lot different calling yourself bi than like gay. Those are two very, 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 very different. Like if you're bi, you're way more closer to straight than you are to gay on that scale, right? Same thing with like non-binaries. They're like, it's like trans light. You're like, diet trans or trans zero. Like you're barely there, right? You have all the same flavors and everything as cis people, but you get to collect a little bit of social credit on the side on Twitter.
Maybe honestly, the only experience I've met in that regard is actually the opposite. I've met, one of my good friends is a lesbian, but she's like, yeah, like I'll have sex with dudes every now and then because, I mean, I would consider myself a lesbian, but dudes are just like way easier to have sex with, if I ever want to have sex. And so, she'll mix it up with guys every now and then, but so she's more, I guess 90% lesbian and, 10% straight or whatever the breakdown is.
Yeah, that sounds like 0% lesbian and 100% bi, but... Or if you want to get really technical, you would say like, like I would consider myself like bisexual, but I'm like hetero-romantic. I'll never date a guy ever my entire life.
Well, she's the opposite. Yeah, she's homo-romantic, where like all her actual relationships have always been women. But if she's surfing Tinder every now and then, it's like, oh,
I think that's what I said.
Just kind of want to have a little fun.
Yeah, bisexual, you'll fuck whatever, or you're messing around with anybody, but hetero-romantic, right? Or no, I'm sorry, you're right. It's the opposite.
I think she's homo-romantic. Yeah. But no, I do see what you're saying. Yeah, that's true. I didn't actually look into that. If it's like a third of Gen Zers literally identifying as like gay or lesbian, or if it's more so just
bisexual.
A lot more people being pansexual, bisexual, whatever.
Oh yeah, sorry, pansexual is what they call it now.
Well, I mean, it's kind of the same thing. I don't know.
Pansexual, it's the hipper one. Like you don't want to be a fucking bisexual. You're probably like transphobic or something.
Basic bisexual kid.
Yeah, loser.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Because the idea of like social contagions as applied to trans people, I mean, I think that's almost entirely negative connotation. It's like, you're tricking people, or you're indoctrinating people into being trans and wanting to fucking cut their dick off or get these hormones or whatever. And it's like, I don't really think that's true. All these news stories about, oh, this teacher had a rainbow heart in her class and she's indoctrinating kids.
Sure.
But, well, good self-ID discussion, Destiny. I think that I have fleshed out my position on this somewhat. as a result of this conversation.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I love you, buddy.
Let me
Stay
see. What are you
safe.
doing the rest of the stream?
Just watch my factory a little bit, but maybe have a quick little sexy update on our good friend XQC. But that's just streamer drama.
Oh no.
So.
What's happening with XQC?
Well, it's more like what didn't happen with XQC.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, you got to tell me, Dusty. I have no idea.
Well, you'll have to tune into the stream.
Oh
okay?
shit. Okay, I've got to tune in. All right. Well, I'll be a loyal viewer then. I'll tune in to see what's happening with XQC.
Cool.
In his life. But yeah, thanks for talking. It was good talking, and I'll see you in DGG later.
Yeah, no problem. Have fun. Be careful, buddy.